Hello, and welcome to the Management Matters podcast by the University of Liverpool Management School. I'm Hazel Kennedy, and in this episode, we'll delve into the world of branding and explore how today's brands maintain their buzz. I'm delighted to welcome Professor Anatoli Colicev, who is Professor of Marketing, Strategy and Analytics at the Management School, and Jason Spencer, Business Development Director at ITV.
Hi, Jason. Nice to meet you.
Nice
it's
to
a
meet
big
you
pleasure being here. And I think I'm quite excited about the topic. It's topic of my research, but I know you've done a lot of work on this. So I'm excited to hear what's your opinion about brand buzz. What do you think it is and what do we do about it?
That is a big question. So I'll try and keep it simple. I've spent 30 years in my career working with brands of all shapes and sizes. I guess in many ways trying to create brand buzz. Whether it's brands that people love and aspire to, or whether it's brands you've never heard of. And I think the really easy way I would try and describe this, keeping it dead simple, is there's millions of products and services out there. But how do you turn a product or service into something that people want or need? And that way that you create emotional connection, you create that mental availability, that desire is what brand building is. It's about building that relationship between the product and service and the person. And brand buzz can go up and down. It can wax and wane. There's no God-given right why one thing has it or one thing loses it, but it's something you've got to keep working at.
Wow, excellent. So, when I think about brand buzz sometimes, what you mentioned, creating product experiences and, creating the connection.
And desire as well.
And desire for the product, right? So we have seen like a few brands doing that quite effectively. And others fail sometimes to do that. So can you think about experiences? You have 30 years of experience doing that. So think about like a really good example where a brand succeeded and a really bad example when they didn't. What do you think?
There are so many I could pick from, but I suppose, can I just sort of take a step back and slightly contextualize it? Because I think of all the think about your own life, think about everything that you do during a day, the products and services you interact with, the physical things, the experiences, each of those can be a brand in itself. Some are things that are really high interest that might cost you a lot of money. Some are things that are low interest that you probably don't even think about. Think about when you go around a supermarket, you almost do something called sleep shopping. You're going around buying the same products again and again. And when you question yourself, why am I buying that product rather than that? Why am I paying more for that product rather than that? There's something which you might say is a habit, but you're still making a kind of subconscious choice to pay more for something, to buy something of different quality. And most of our decision making it's emotional. We don't always make rational decisions. Right. And I think I'll give you an example of a brand. Well, it's a service really it didn't exist 15 years ago. It's quite functional. It's kind of a means to an end. And in many respects, helps you to do something that you shouldn't have a relationship. And that's aggregator sites. So when you're searching for cheap car insurance, cheap home insurance, you generally will go to a website like Go Compare the Market, Money Supermarket. Now, 15 years ago, these didn't exist. You would have to ring each of those companies for a quote, or you'd go on the internet. They're like a search aggregator, so they're compiling the best offers that are out there in market. And if I use something like Compare the Market, because there was a bit of an arms race about 10, 15 years ago for share of mind and sort of share of markets that goes with it as the market grew. And what Compare the Market did, which feels counterintuitive, is rather than advertise why they were better, they created a cuddly toy, the meerkat, and they created an entire family around that. And they created this ecosystem that felt totally irrational. It has nothing to do with why you might choose to go to Compare the Market site rather than Go Compares. But in so doing, and keeping that as what we call a fluent device over time, because the meerkat still exists, they've iterated over time, by integrating them with culture in all the ways that they did, that means that, certainly for me, if I'm thinking, where do I go for an aggregator site? It's Compare the Market. I can't explain why. It's the same prices I'll get elsewhere. It's quite an irrational decision. So that's a good example. Let me pick a bad example, all right? So let's stay in that same world of aggregator sites, right? So I'm assuming you and many of the people watching this have been on aggregator sites when they are picking, let's say, car insurance, right? Or travel insurance, you're picking, right? So common sense would dictate, I'm going on there. It's a really low interest, quite expensive product I'm buying. So I'm going to go for the cheapest one on there, right? And on the cheapest one on the list, let's say that costs £900 a year. And then you've got the more expensive ones coming down there. Why is it that people don't choose the cheapest one every time? Because they haven't heard of it, because they can't trust it. And one of the things about brand is if you create brand buzz, you create this inherent trust in your brand. Obviously, I work in the world of TV now, so I will unashamedly give some examples from my world. But one of the great people to deliver insight in the world of marketing is a guy called Rory Sutherland. And he talks about signaling. And the thing with signaling is it's that association. It's some of those unconscious associations that you build. And he talks about the peacock effect, the fact that peacocks have these amazing feathers that they display when they're trying to send out signals. Now, the thing with signaling is on TV, it's really expensive, right? You could just advertise on search. You could look at some other means which are less costly. But by advertising on TV, which is expensive, it shows a confidence in your brand. I believe so much in my product and my business. I'm going to put money behind this. I'm going to put my investment behind this because I want to communicate it to everyone. In that ecosystem of aggregators, good example with Compare the Market, but also good and bad examples with those on the list that you do or don't choose.
Interesting. So I'll give you like an example, for example, from my research. So when you explained about those brands that are positioned in different search positions, right? So what we find, interestingly, that take a large brand such as Marks and Spencer's.
Yep.
And sometimes when they launch advertising campaigns or go on the media, what happens is that, let's say they're advertising for the Christmas meal, like the famous Christmas meal advertising they're doing, right? What could happen is that what we find is that they can make other competitors salient in consumer minds. So what will happen sometimes that they will advertise the Christmas meal and consumers would think, hey, I need to get a Christmas meal.
Yeah.
But Marks and Spencer's is expensive. So let me go to Tesco and buy the same thing. While Tesco basically did nothing to promote that. And sometimes you can have this negative spillover effects of even positive advertising campaigns.
Yeah, you drive the market. But I think there is a lot of evidence to show, so there's different ways you can look at this. And actually Christmas advertising is a really interesting case in point because that is a proper arms race. It's often about the weight of spend that all of the big supermarkets will have. Because we're all going to buy extra food and drink over Christmas. That's one of the things that we all know. So it's about how do you drive that front of mind awareness, that mental availability, and also importantly, that distinctiveness and differentiation. They're all selling an experience on Christmas Day. They're all selling a product and we will all pay different amounts based on how much we're prepared to invest in it. But there is a link between what we call share of voice and share of market. So even at a very basic level, when you look at advertising investment, so TV, whatever it might be, the weight of activity, if you increase your share of voice by 10 percentage points versus your share of market, so you're punching above your weight in real terms, you will grow your share of market. The counterpoint to that is, so let's say, take the example of M&S, right? So they say, we want to grow our share of market at Christmas, so we're going to spend more money. Well, let's say they don't have the budgets to do that because their budget will be set. So then the question is, okay, well, if we don't have as much money, we can't shrug our shoulders. How are we still going to grow our share of market? We're going to have to spend it smarter. We're going to have to spend it differently to the competition. And that's where the kind of complexity of marketing solutions, advertising channels, even ways that you might use TV, from sponsorship right through to advertising, right through to clever ways that you can integrate with talent and IP, helps you to cut through.
Interesting. So far we have taken a lot of firm perspective, kind of to see this, right? But actually most viral campaigns in brand buzz and viral campaigns in branding are not generated by brands themselves, but actually are generated from users who might pick up on some brand content or might even create their own content in communities. For example, there is a famous case where Harley Davidson campaigns are completely generated from their communities, where people would come together, meet with their bikes and then create a viral video which would boost Harley's sales by a lot immediately without even Harley doing anything around it. So do you think, in my view, user-generated content and everything that happens on social media is uncontrollable by the brand from one point of view, right? You cannot control it. But you can somehow shape those conversations when you see that they are happening. And in my view, and I've seen this across elasticities, across multiple categories as well, that when you have actual buzz generated by the audience itself, it feels more authentic, it feels more natural, and hence it creates a more viral effect and eventually, in fact, affect market share and things like that. So how do you think this could happen?
Yeah. I think this can work both ways. It can be a positive and a negative. I think you can see things that actually spiral out of control that even from a PR perspective are difficult to kind of claw back. I think if you have a strong brand actually outside of that, then you can negate some of the downsides of that if you get into that situation. I think that on its own, we'll come on to talk about what we call the media multiplier effect. I think there is undoubtedly an inextricable link between all of the different marketing channels. You can't say solely viral did that or TV did that. It's about how all of this ecosystem works together, because consumers are exposed to all of this stuff on their kind of consumer journey and their consumption of media. I think when it works well, it's where brands harness that and spot it and then leverage it and capitalize on it. I think, let me give an example actually in our world, because when we talk about viral, it's as much about word of mouth and the content that you cannot buy. It organically grows. So last year, we launch programs all the time. And if you treat each program that we're launching like a brand launch, all right, beforehand, no one's ever heard of that show. So we might put some marketing investment behind that. And our way of growing sales is trying to get as many viewers as possible, because that has a knock-on effect to advertising revenue as a result and our reputation. So last year, we launched a show on New Year's Day called Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. And that ran for 4 consecutive nights. We ran it New Year's Day. For anyone who's seen it, it probably wasn't the kind of feel-good TV you might have wanted to watch on New Year's Day. So it actually did pretty good viewing figures across those 4 consecutive nights, about 4.5 million. But then the noise around it, the feedback, the kind of buzz around that generated, and then the impact that had on the general public, on national press coverage, on MPs, on changing legislation across the next 3 to 4 weeks was something we could not have predicted. And we had to almost ride on the coattails of that. So you get 4.5 million people who've watched it when it's on, January the 1st to 4th. By the end of January, 14.5 million people have watched it. I think a good example of where we've seen that this year is adolescence and the impact that's had. Now, I don't know anyone who watched that on the first day that it was launched, but I know loads of people, millions of people who watched it over the coming weeks and months, particularly in that first 3 or 4 weeks when the noise grew. And yes, it is about that kind of viral noise, and social media plays a part in that, but it's also just voices. People saying, have you seen? Reading about it in newspapers, hearing about it. The fact that with adolescents, you had Keir Starmer saying that every school should watch this. And I think when you've got a strong brand or a strong product or a strong service, you can do that. But if you haven't, it can rebound on you.
Interesting. So you spoke about metrics, and I was thinking about something that actually came to my mind immediately. So you speak about market share and reactions to buzz and how people view videos, right? Another aspect of this is the financial performance of actual company.
Yeah.
And if you are, for example, a FTSE, right, 100 stock market listed company, we find actually quite interesting results there, that the buzz generated by the brand and the social media conversations and the videos and the shows perhaps could drive also investor reactions to a company. And it provides the signal, not only consumers, but provides a strong signal to investors. And as we know, all the CEOs and everyone are evaluated, their compensation depends sometimes on the stock market performance. So I don't know if you had experience working with publicly listed firms or thinking about non-publicly listed firms, but private firms which can relate their campaigns to actual financial measures such as sales.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, every single penny that gets spent on TV advertising on ITV is related back to sales. And any brand that says they're not doing that or not trying to find ways to measure it, whether they're measuring it effectively or not, is not telling the truth. So we work at ITV with about 2,500 advertisers a year. Some will spend under £1,000. Some will spend over 10 million. And there is a wide range and quite a long tail. And many of those brands are testing TV for the first time. We'll work with FTSE listed companies. We'll work with privately owned sort of SMEs. And in many respects, when you're looking an owner in the eye and it's their money and they've written the check, that's in some ways more difficult a conversation than if you're talking to someone where they're reporting to shareholders. But in every single case, what every single advertiser wants is a proven return on investment. And in many instances, and increasingly at ITV over the last 4 to 5 years, we've tried to bridge the gap between their investment in TV and the sales effect, because what digital media has done incredibly well as it's grown over the last 20 years is provide a way of measuring and framing. You did this in search or social, you drove this in sales. But there is an element of taking credit, I would say, for the total performance. And if you think about search in its barest form and think about when you use a search engine, it's about demand that's generated that's then harvested through you searching for that, whether you go through the paid or organic term, whether you go through a category term or a brand specific term. And you have to question, right, well, how did they get to that point where demand was created? It wasn't created by search in its own right. It's about building that brand buzz. Why did someone choose to go onto that website rather than that? When they search out a category, why do they choose not necessarily the top ranking option, but the third ranking, going back to what we said about aggregator sites? So what we've done, we've spent a lot of money and built a team over the last 4 to 5 years, as has the TV industry as a whole, to prove how you can relate advertising investment right through to sales. And this is what we call full funnel measurements. You go from awareness, very simply, you go from awareness, consideration or preference, but taking it right through to the specific KPIs. It might be site traffic, conversion, sale, average order value, return value. And then we will track that across time. And that, being able to go to a business and evidence it, and them saying, we'll measure that for you, is in many ways where we rigorously underpin the magic of them investing and being on TV and some of the things we've talked about with the robustness of the impact it has on their business. And it's about the pounds and pence they drive.
No, that's great. I mean, the attribution is actually one of the key things businesses want. They want to know where to put every dollar, right? So if you show attribution from some causal modeling that you do, some experimental where you maybe run some ad for some time in one platform and not on the other, this is actually cool. But let's talk something that everyone talks about nowadays, which is a controversial topic. Let's talk sustainability, ESG, and whether brands should engage in this topic. So it was a very straightforward answer maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted to do sustainability. Everyone wanted to launch green products. Everyone wanted to have DEI discussed everywhere. And I think in the last couple of years, especially not in the UK, but probably in the US, the discussion has shifted a little bit. Yeah. And I think it became not a straightforward answer for brands. Shall I launch a campaign which involves more DEI elements or sustainability elements, or it can backlash me or with certain specific consumers, depending on the political also affiliations of my consumers, right? So what do you think? Did you notice any changes in how brands operate in the last year or so?
Let me talk about it from a UK perspective. I mean, many of the businesses working with are headquartered in the US, so there'll be a dimension of that. And let me give it from the perspective of what we're observing with brands, but also from an ITV point of view. So if we look at what we're observing with brands, if we take sustainability of what you might call greenwashing, right? Yeah. Where brands were saying, look, I'm bad over here, but I'm going to do something over here to try and distract you. And we will do our own sustainability audit on those businesses for those that we're prepared to put our stamp of approval on, those that we won't, because you can't just use us as a vehicle to kind of deliver a message that doesn't have authenticity. Authenticity is disproportionately important because we've seen many instances of brands that try to get away with it and consumers call them out. I think in terms of diversity, I think it's a really interesting. We work with a business called System One who look at creative effectiveness tracking across TV advertising. So they've got about 30,000 different ads in the UK, and they've done a lot in the US and Australia as well. So you've got some great benchmarks. And they did a big report in partnership with ITV about 2-3 years ago, which was all about looking at representation from a diversity perspective in advertising. So the representation of older people, disability, sexuality, people of different cultures and backgrounds. And they came up with this term, which I love, called the diversity dividend.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at brands such as Tesco, right through to brands like Maltesers. And when you reflect in there the many different, the diversity of the UK in your casting, but you're on and off screen, then what happens is that the public as a whole, but also those people who see themselves on screen, represented on screen, you get this positive halo effect, which will carry through to sales impact as a proven thing. So if so that there was a campaign that Tesco ran called Food Love Stories, right? And they ran a series of different ads in that. And one of the ads had an Asian family, and I think it was the son's cooking for the mum and using her recipe. And the halo effect, and then they run that on outdoor as well, has an impact on all of us. Right. Ultimately. Now, from an ITV perspective, we're a public service broadcaster. So we have a responsibility on so many levels, as do the likes of Channel 4 and the BBC and Sky as well. And we all are trying to do our bits. But from our perspective, we have a number of social purpose campaigns around healthy mind, healthy body, around the environment as well. But let me just take two recent examples of how this kind of comes to fruition, mainly through our programming. 2 shows we've got this year which have really caught the audience's imagination. Whether you see yourself reflected on screen or not, we've got a drama called Code of Silence, which is on at the moment with Rose Ayling-Ellis, who's deaf, which is about using her lip reading skills and signing as a superpower. And another show we've got called The Assembly. It's a very low budget show in the scheme of things, but it has an audience of people who are disabled, autistic and neurodiverse. They're the only people, and they are interviewing a celebrity. And the directness of their questions is unlike any celebrity interview you've ever seen. Even if you don't see yourself reflected, you can relate to, and it builds that emotional connection. So I think any business moving away from this, if they are doing it for the wrong reasons, is massively going to suffer, because there's a link between delivering this authentically and business success. But from a diversity standpoint alone, there is a proven relationship between diversity of teams and business success. And I think it's a business necessity, not an option.
You need to readjust your practices internally, you need to realign your programs, launch new shows, do a lot of groundwork.
It might be different from our perspective.
Exactly.
I mean, stock market price is often driven by sentiment.
Exactly.
There's actually an irrationality sometimes in the stock market performance of a brand. But I think it's also about how you communicate it and how you tell that story.
Yeah.
It's not about we've ticked a box there or we've unticked that box. I think going back to that thing about authenticity, for our business, it matters disproportionately. We're a creative business. Creativity is about ideas. If everyone looks the same, you'll end up with the same idea. Mm-hmm. So this is not about quotas or hitting targets. This is about business success. Now, in a very different category, you could say, well, it's less important. But I would argue that when I talk diversity, I mean in all its forms, right? So any boardroom that does not have a mix of men and women, right, and people from different social backgrounds, irrespective of category, is going to suffer. Any boardroom that is solely white or does not have anyone either with some form of disability or some link to that is going to suffer. Absolutely. Regardless. Whether they call it diversity, equity and inclusion, or whether they just do it is another matter. I think that's the conversation.
I think that's exactly the point, because there is a lot of metrics that organizations want to fill in order to satisfy their shareholders and investors.
Totally.
And they're trying to do it back engineer, like reverse engineer what actually investors are expecting. But in reality, the diversity of ideas usually generated by the diversity of representation in the teams, right? Totally. A lot of psychological research has shown. So actually, having a diverse set of opinions is the key to creativity and all of those things, good things that come out of branding, right? So I think in the end, I would like to kind of tell you a finding that I have, quite a cynical finding that we discovered from the US companies. So it might not apply to UK. We find that actually when companies invest a lot into the environment, and social causes like hiring, diverse employees, or even paying their employees fairly, regardless of gender or other characteristics. We actually find that consumers love it. Consumers of that company really appreciate it when they find out that the companies do that. But institutional investors who are not regular investors, but actually banks and hedge funds, they punish those firms in the short term because of the costs. And this kind of trade-off sometimes scares brands away from doing well, right? Doing good practices. And it's a very US-centric finding, but I find it quite interesting in the context of this discussion.
It is. What you got to remember is, so go back to our starting point, which talk about products and services becoming brands, all right? Behind every product and service and every brand are the people who work for that business. If you get that employee engagement, that work culture through having a purpose which values everyone and values the diversity of ideas and creates that inclusivity, you will get back in spades from your employees that sense of engagement and that sense of belonging. And that may not be reflected in your share price. But if you don't have employees who are engaged, you won't have a share price to worry about. So I think there's a slight imbalance in priorities there. And I think there's probably, I'm not necessarily saying that they're wrong, but I'm kind of saying that they've probably got their priorities wrong in saying, look, actually, the most important thing is the people who work for that business, because without them, we're nothing.
No, I mean, it makes sense. I think in the end of the day, it's branding is a combination of people and consumers, and you have to separate the two. Sometimes you cannot, but I think it was a great discussion talking to you about branding and branding buzz. I think we have covered a lot.
I think what we found is it's a topic with lots of opinions, and there is some evidence and facts. But I think my sort of parting thing would be to say that anyone who's working for a product or service, who's listening to this and watching this, is to think about whether the people who work for their organisation and the people who buy their services or product would consider them as a brand or a product and service. Think about the relationship. Do they have a strong enough emotional connection to them versus their competition? Do they think about them even when they're not in market? You might only be looking for insurance 1 week a year. The other 51 weeks, you've still got to stay in people's heads. So how do you make sure you've got a strong brand? So keep working at it.
Right. Excellent.
That was the Management Matters podcast by the University of Liverpool Management School. Thanks again to our guests, Professor Anatoli Colicev and Jason Spencer. You can find out more information about Anatoli's and all our other research by visiting the Management School's website and connecting on social media. Thanks for listening.